As with all of our presentations here at Royal Roads University, we always begin with an acknowledgement of the traditional lands. Royal Roads University is on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen and Kusepsum ancestors and families. It's with great gratitude that we now learn and work here, where the past, present, and future Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. It's important for us to share this statement because it means that we at RRU recognize the importance of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people's relationships. And we continue to learn to understand the history, present, and future scopes of Indigenous peoples. I'd like to start off with a big thank you to our Master of Arts in Human Security and Peace Building program area for hosting and sponsoring today's discussion. Here is a quick snapshot of the School of Humanitarian Studies here at Royal Roads University. And in the center there, you can see our Master of Arts in Human Security and Peace Building. If you have any questions about this program or any others on our campus, please feel free to send us an email at learn.more@royalroads.ca. And with that, let's begin our session today. I am thrilled to pass the microphone over to Dr. Kenneth Christie, who is the program head of our Master of Arts in Human Security and Peace Building program. Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Celia. Sorry about that. I was muted completely. Thanks. Can you hear me now?
We can. Coming through clear.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, thanks so much again, Selena and Athena, for bringing this together. It's an amazing event, and we always hold amazing events, as you know, through the Human Security and Peace Building Program and all the other programs at Royal Roads. But this is quite special because we have four really great panelists today. The theme is the International Day of Peace, which is today. It's observed around the world, and the United Nations General Assembly has declared this day as devoted to strengthening the ideals of peace through observing 24 hours of non-violence and ceasefire. And the theme this year is recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world. So what we're trying to do is these recovery efforts offer an opportunity to transform our relationship with our planet and our environment. And this peace is foundational to recovery, as global vaccination efforts cannot advance amidst armed conflict. Nor can we really build a sustainable, resilient, or peaceful world while we're at war with nature. So what we're trying to do in this virtual dialogue is discuss standing up against hatred and discrimination, caring for the planet, global solidarity, and vaccination equity, all areas critical to a just recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're trying to reimagine also, of course, a better future for people on the planet. And this particularly so in the light of the conflicts in Afghanistan, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, what's happening all over the world, and all the forgotten conflicts, of course, because there are many conflicts going on that are just not getting attention in the news. The conflicts in Myanmar, for instance, the conflicts in Africa, in the Congo, and many, many other places where people are just not getting the kind of attention that we give to other issues. So it's important to remember these conflicts and try to think up peaceable solutions to them. So in that sense, we have a great panel. Our first panelist is Rhett Realkoff. He's an alumni of the Master of Arts in Environmental Management. He's also the program coordinator in the Human Security and Peace Building program. And he's going to explore caring for the planet and making peace with nature through the context of Fairy Creek's old growth logging protests. Rhett is a highly skilled practitioner in many of these areas. He's also a fantastic musician, so I'd like to give a plug out for his band, because I know he's sometimes on tour, and if you get the chance to hear him, definitely try and see him in concert. Our second panelist is Kenny Panza. Kenny is an alumni of the Master of Arts in Human Security and Peacebuilding. He's one of our top alumni. He's going to explore the interplay of racial and environmental justice under the umbrella of peace. I should also mention that Kenny won the Founders Award in the last convocation in June 2021. So Kenny is highly skilled at this kind of thing, and I'm sure he's going to give a fantastic presentation also. Our third panelist is Adam Houston. Adam is Associate Faculty within the School of Humanitarian Studies, and Adam is going to look at vaccine equity and Canada's inaction on the TRIPS waiver. So thank you for joining us, Adam. And last but not least, of course, our fourth panelist is Jennifer Arp, who's an alumni for the Master of Arts in Intercultural and International Communication. And Jennifer will look at exploring and mobilizing at the community level to sustain peaceful action and solidarity. So thank you for joining. And I'm going to hand it over now to Rhett, and look forward to all these presentations. So thank you.
Great, and thanks, Ken, for the introduction, and happy International Day of Peace, everybody. It's good to be here and to be talking a bit. So yeah, as Ken mentioned, my name is Rhett Realkoff. I'm an alumni of the Masters of Environmental Management program at Royal Roads. Previous to that, I did my undergrad at U of S. I've done some work over the years with environmental NGOs, and I've been involved a little bit with some of the blockades that have been going on out at Fairy Creek. And so today I'm going to be talking about the situation around the old growth logging blockades that are happening out there. So next slide, please. Okay, so how does this relate to International Day of Peace? So this year's theme is recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world. So we cannot build a sustainable, resilient, peaceful world while we are at war with nature. And the UN on their website mentions that we must make peace with nature despite the travel restrictions and economic shutdowns. Climate change is not on pause. What we need is a green and sustainable global economy that produces jobs, reduces emissions, and builds resilience to climate impacts. So in this sense, what does sustainable mean? I think it means that something has the characteristic, at least in theory, of being able to last forever. So at some point, humanity must enter into a relationship of coexistence with Earth's biosphere that is maintainable in perpetuity. Next slide, please. So what's the global situation right now with regard to the environment? You know, we've had record heat waves and fires just in BC alone. We've set records for heat, and you know, we've had fires every summer blocking out the sun and compromising air quality, deforestation here in BC and the Amazon, you know, terrible deforestation happening. We've had record storms and rainfall. And you can see here, there's a little picture of an article by Bill McKibben in The Guardian from just a week ago, talking about violence against environmental activists. And so there was a record 227 killings globally in the last year. So we can see that conflict between capitalism and profit motives and the limitations of the biosphere and plant, animal, and human populations have reached their limits. So humans are taking more than the planet is able to give. And unfortunately, anybody's trying to stand in the way or slow down or stop this destruction is being met with increasing violence and even death, as we can see. So next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking about Fairy Creek and what's happening out there. So here's a map of the Fairy Creek area, and you can see Big Lonely Doug and Avatar Grove over there for people who are familiar. Off to the west, Port Renfrew is just out of the picture, down to the southwest, maybe this way, I can't tell. And as you can see, the area in the Fairy Creek watershed is beautiful, dark green. It's mostly untouched, intact forest with a lot of old growth. And you can see the scarring on the landscape surrounding it caused by clear-cutting forestry practices. And so in just looking at this visual alone, we can see that something is wrong with this picture. This doesn't look like a sustainable practice. And this, you know, obviously this can't be healthy for the life forms that depend on this environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does this relate to Fairy Creek? Where you can see the quote there, we are in a climate and biodiversity crisis. Only 2.7% of BC's original productive old growth forests remain standing. Not a great number. And so what have the blockaders been doing? So they've sent a message to government and industry that in a time of climate and biodiversity crises, disruption to the status quo is to be expected until the government takes action to protect what is left of these globally significant and irreplaceable forests. The objective of these actions is to stem the tide of the destruction, which has been said equivalent to 32 soccer fields of old growth forest per day, and protect the last 1 to 3% of low elevation old growth rainforests left standing on Vancouver Island. And so these forests here are home to a host of endangered species, including western screech owls, northern goshawk, and northern red-legged frogs. And today across the province of BC, ancient giant trees are still falling. And this is in spite of scientific evidence that there's so little left, and that these last old growth forests are critical to maintaining ecosystem services, a stable climate, the air that we breathe, and the water that we drink. Next slide, please. Okay, so who's involved? We got a little bit of a snapshot there. Some of the people in that picture. Sort of the self-named Rainforest Flying Squad is sort of the name that they've given to the sort of settler and indigenous people participating in the blockade. We have Teal Jones, which is the logging company that's involved, the Apache First Nation, whose territory a lot of these forests are located on, also the Didi First Nation, who also has some territory in the KQs area where some of their forests are at stake here. And then also the RCMP, obviously, who's been enforcing the injunction that's been happening. So the relationship here with Teal Jones, so Teal Jones is not specifically in partnership with the Apache but has obtained its consent. The Apache signed a revenue sharing agreement with the provincial government in 2017, and under this agreement, the band receives a portion of the stumpage fees paid to the provincial government, and in exchange agrees not to interfere with that activity. So just a brief overview of who's involved and what's going on there. So next slide, please. So here's where we really get to the conflict. So what's at the heart of this conflict? So with the survival of old growth forests reaching a precipice, the government in the province in 2019 commissioned an old growth strategic review. This review made 14 recommendations, including immediate logging deferrals that it said must be implemented within 6 months. In his fall election campaign, Premier John Horgan promised a new future for old forests and committed to implementing a series of these recommendations on old growth, including the immediate logging deferrals in areas of high risk. One of those areas is the Fairy Creek area on Pachidat territory and nearby KQs on Dididat territory. And these areas are among the highest value old growth forests remaining across the province. And so by the time the Premier had made these comments, many people had already been blockading and stopping logging for several months. And this promise should have come as relief, but in the months since the election, the hope has faltered as logging continued as usual. And in fact, a recent analysis has shown that logging approvals in old growth forests went up by almost 50% in the past year. And unsurprisingly, more people have joined the blockades and the tensions are rising. So it seems apparent that the government has sort of been taking a talk and log approach, talking about reducing old growth logging, protecting forests, setting up these panels to review things, but all the while the actual practice is that old growth logging continues at a rapid pace. So a brief overview of what's happened out there. In August 2020, some activists were alerted that a road building crew subcontracted to Teal Jones was cresting the ridge into the headwaters of the Fairy Creek watershed, which is an area of old growth yellow cedar and the last unlogged tributary of the San Juan River system, which is on unceded Pachidat territory near Port Renfrew. Sunday, August 9th, 2020, 30 activists set up Ridge Camp, which was a road blockade 1,000 meters up a logging road on a ridge overlooking the Gordon River Valley on the western flank of Fairy Creek. And then 1 week later, another blockade was set up to protect the watershed on its eastern flank, which became known as River Camp. And this was to stop the clear-cut logging in an area of ancient forest that is part of the 5,100 acre Fairy Creek rainforest. on September 4th of 2020, Pachidat Elder Bill Jones chose to go public with his invitation and released the first of many statements exploring the complexities of colonial coercion against traditional forms of Indigenous governance. More Pachidat members would also follow in opposing logging on their traditional territories. There's a lot that's happened, but basically over the winter, activists maintain and reinforce their blockades in the area. In April of this year, the BC Supreme Court granted an injunction that would allow the RCMP to arrest and remove blockaders. And also journalists and some legal observers have also been removed from the area during this sort of standoff. On the other hand, a letter was released and signed by Band Council Chief Jeff Jones and Hereditary Chief Frank Jones, reading that involvement from the protesters was unwelcome on Pachidat territory. So though the letter claimed to speak for the nation, it was said to be issued unilaterally and without community consent. So we can see even within the Pachidat First Nation, there's a bit of division about what to do regarding stewardship of the forests on their territories. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the current situation as of today, basically more than 1,000 arrests have been made since the RCMP started to enforce the injunction. The court injunction remains in effect, but it's supposed to expire later this month. Until Jones was recently in court last week, applying for a 1-year extension to the injunction. The logging continues. The blockades have still been effective, but they've been sort of bringing in loggers and industry via helicopter to some areas to log the area. So that's been going on. The protests continue, the arrests continue. So not much has been resolved. Next slide, please. So making peace, this is a huge question. It obviously doesn't have an easy answer. I mean, locally, the BC government honoring and enacting the recommendations of its own old growth strategic review and managing not just logging, but all the natural resources in the province sustainably would go a long way. We just had election. So I think voting parties into power who are taking issues of the environment and climate change seriously is a big issue. And as a global community, we need to find ways to live in balance with Earth's biosphere, in balance with the plant and animal kingdoms and with each other. And I think one of the things that has been successful globally has been handing over stewardship to Indigenous peoples. And I'll end with a quote by Aya Clappis, who is a Huaya Indigenous youth. And she says, "My hope is that we can all move together into a just transition and sustainable economies where no one is harmed, but rather it lends our coastal peoples the rights and responsibilities to be caretakers of the land." So I'll end with that, and I look forward to seeing some of your comments and questions a bit later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Rhett. What a great presentation, and really on time as well. Our next speaker is Kenny Panza, and I'd like to welcome him again, one of our top alumni from the Human Security and Peacebuilding Program. Thanks for joining us, Kenny. All the way from, where are you at the moment?
Hey, Ken. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I just moved to Victoria, actually, so
I'm
actually not too far from you right now.
Okay, great.
Awesome. So I will be sharing my screen. Can everybody see this? Yes, perfect.
Great.
Awesome. Well, my name is Kenny Panza, and and then today I'll be discussing very briefly on the topic of environmental racism. So as part of the United Nations International Day of Peace, I think it's important to understand that many people live in a state of what can be described as negative peace. If you've never heard of the term negative peace before, let me give you a quick example. Perhaps in Canada here, we live in a peaceful nation, but that doesn't mean that at the individual or community level, the human security and the livelihoods of people are not under threat. Negative peace is the absence of war. It's the absence of conflict. It's the absence of personal direct violence to oneself, but it's also the absence of justice. And as part of the absence of justice, we can see the presence of latent structural violence in which we can find elements such as environmental racism. Environmental racism was first coined by African-American civil rights leader, Dr. Benjamin Chavez in 1982. He described the term as such: Racial discrimination in environmental policymaking, the enforcement of regulations and laws, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities, and the history of excluding people of color from leadership of the ecology movements. In other words, environmental racism is a term used to describe environmental injustice that occurs within racialized contexts in both practice and in policy. In Canada, the study of Dr. Ingrid Waldron is an important one to note. There is Something in the Water is the title of her book, published in 2018, in which she highlights the disproportionate impact of provincial policies associated with environmental hazards in the vicinity of Indigenous communities and African Nova Scotian communities in Nova Scotia. As you can see on this map, the yellow dots represent the areas in which the Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotian communities reside, and in very close proximity to pretty much all of them, in red, where we can see our waste disposal sites, thermal generating stations, and other toxic industries. The human security impact can be seen mostly in health insecurities with increased likelihood of diseases such as cancer, but the effects of environmental racism in Nova Scotia are compounded by other forms of oppression that result in community, economic, and political insecurity. A very similar dynamic can be seen also south of the border, and then I chose the case study of Cancer Alley. If you never heard of Cancer Alley before, it is an 85-mile stretch on the banks of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans in Louisiana. The people living along this strip are predominantly African American, many of whom are descendant of people that were enslaved on these same lands under plantation systems. The area is home to over 150 chemical plants, facilities, and refineries. According to a United Nations report, the area produces the yearly equivalent of CO2 emissions exceeding those of 113 countries combined, and some community burial sites also being threatened to be destroyed by ongoing industrial expansion along the strip. When it comes to global emissions, a recent study from the Lancet quantified the contributions of cumulative CO2 emissions in excess of planetary boundaries. This approach is rooted in the principle of equal per capita access to atmospheric commons. As we can see on this chart, the results of the study indicate that the global north is responsible for 92% of excess emissions in comparison to only 8% from the global south. Perhaps you've seen different studies, you've seen different numbers, different figures from different studies varying in scopes, but the main takeaway of this slide is that the predominantly non-white global south suffers most of the effects of climate change, which are caused largely by human-induced catastrophes, of which the global north is the main contributor. On a global scale, environmental racism is manifested through different means. In the past 25 years or so, there have been many efforts to tackle climate change at a policy level, especially through United Nations, climate change conferences and summits. But what we're seeing is that developed countries are seen to be dictating to developing nations how and when to develop. This is known as green colonialism. Conservation colonialism is a term that represents the interest driven from the global north to take land and resources from indigenous people in the name of conservation and humanity. In turn, those conservation projects become areas from which tourism can profit from. Neo-colonialism is also another form of environmental racism at the global scale, It is described as the extraction of resources and domination of former colonies by global powers and corporation through the operations of international capitalism. There are many examples of this in what we consume here in the global north, especially North America. If you just think of the fruits that you consume every day, bananas, avocados, and pineapples. If you just think of the computers that you use, the tech, your smartphone or whatnot, and all those raw materials come from mining industries in the DRC, for example, when it comes to cobalt, copper, diamond, tin, and gold. Another industry that we can think of under neo-colonialism is the clothing industry, especially when it comes to fast fashion with clothes and then exploitation out of South Asia and Southeast Asia. And lastly, on this slide, waste export. As we all know, developed nations pay developing countries to dispose hazardous materials. This is another form of environmental racism. In sum, I wanted to conclude this presentation with a quick quote here from British politician David Lammy. "We cannot tackle the climate crisis without addressing racial inequalities. Racial injustice and climate injustice are both rooted in the evil notion that some lives are more important than others." The elements of environmental racism did not just appear out of the blue. An important lesson that I have personally learned in my graduate program at RRU was that many disciplines, systems, and paradigms are interconnected. I used to uphold some sort of hierarchy of what issues were more important than others, but that was completely wrong. It is only through interdisciplinary approaches, frameworks, and solutions that we can collectively address the biggest crisis of our time. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I know this was fast and furious, so this is my last slide before I stop sharing my screen. These are just potential web searches of perhaps interest to some of you, so feel free to take a screenshot or take a photo with your phone, and this will come down in about 5 seconds. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kenny, for a fascinating presentation. And it's so important to look at these issues and interconnections between these issues. I mean, one of the things you're talking about in the program is that we try to connect these issues together, of course, because they are connected in major ways. And I really appreciate you pointing that out. Our next speaker is Adam Houston, who is an associate faculty in the School of Humanitarian Studies. Thanks for joining us today, Adam, and welcome to the webinar.
Oh, thanks very much. Great to be part of this really interesting and very diverse lineup of takes on this very important day. I guess I should point out that today I am speaking in my personal capacity, but as you know, conflict of interest, I am on my lunch break from MSF. So if my just raging bias towards people having access to medicines comes through, you know, I come about it honestly here. So peace, you know, conflict obviously has serious direct implications on health, on public health, but it also has very serious indirect implications, you know, disrupting access to services. And a really important example of that is access to vaccinations. And there's a long history of recognizing this and the importance of stopping the shooting so that we can start the shots. Here's a classic example in the 80s in El Salvador, when conflict there was temporarily halted for to administer childhood vaccinations. And this is a theme that has continued to the current day. This is a Security Council resolution from earlier this year. I haven't put up the whole thing here, but this is calling for a global ceasefire in order to further access to COVID-19 vaccinations. However, even if all the guns were silenced, even if we had no conflict in the world right now, we would still have serious inequities in terms of vaccine access. And therefore, when we're talking about things like recovery and building back, this is a very serious consideration and consideration for countries like Canada, as we perhaps see the light at the end of the tunnel, but the rest of the world, or many countries in the rest of the world, do not. So this is from last week. Dr. Tedros is the Director General of the World Health Organization, pointing out that over 5.7 billion doses have already been administered around the world. But of those, only 2% were given on the continent of Africa. In fact, the bulk of those have been in about 10 high-income countries. So how did we get to this state of affairs? Because certainly early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, there was this sense of global solidarity, right? There's a high-profile op-ed. You might recognize some of the names, but these are all national leaders signing on to this, saying that we need to guarantee equal access to the COVID-19 vaccine at the point this was written, when they exist. They did not exist in July. Today, however, so wow, a very up-to-date presentation here, cutting edge. We heard Antonio Gutierrez, the Director General, or Secretary General, excuse me, of the United Nations today, speaking to the General Assembly, saying that, scientifically the world has triumphed, but, giving an A in science, but an F in ethics for the global rollout of these vaccines. And so how do we get here? Well, many of you may have heard of one of the mechanisms that was intended to promote equitable access, the COVAX facility. So the COVAX facility, in extreme brief, was kind of a pooling mechanism. So countries would join based on their resources, and in return, they would also take out vaccines from COVAX with a target through COVAX of hitting 20% of their population. Unfortunately, COVAX has fallen really short. So as of 2 weeks ago, remember we saw 5.7 billion doses administered. Of those, 243, a little bit higher now, total came from COVAX. So really not a huge contribution. And those 243 doses are spread across 139 recipient countries, including Canada. And in fact, COVAX has just recently downgraded its forecast by more than 25% of doses that they think they will be able to administer this year. So, how did we get to this point? And it's much longer than this presentation. There are a number of structural flaws with COVAX itself, but really one of the big reasons is that there are a limited number of vaccines in the world at the moment. And despite calls for solidarity, countries that had means, including Canada, and I'm going to focus on Canada for the remainder of this presentation, but this does apply to many other wealthy countries, also rushed in to make sure they got their piece and more than their piece of the pie. So this is from last fall. Government of Canada document pointing out that Canada, as of early December, had the most diverse and extensive vaccine portfolio of any country in the world. We had secured the most doses per capita of any country, which was about 11, more than 10 doses per capita of which was through bilateral deals. Another about a half dose per person through COVAX. So just to clarify this, Canada absolutely has the right to take doses from COVAX through this solidarity model, as it did. It was the only G7 country to do so in the first round. But at the same time, it was also undermining COVAX because it was directly competing for that same group of doses. And it continued to do so even after this graph, actually, and even after the WHO had said, please stop competing with COVAX and signing new deals. So we're in an interesting position because Canada was actually very generous financially to COVAX, one of the most generous countries in the world in terms of financial contributions. But those financial contributions don't go as far when there's actually no vaccines left to buy because we already bought more than our share for ourselves. So been in an interesting position where we saw that as of the end of July, Canada actually had, in Canada, received enough vaccines to fully vaccinate everybody eligible. So by the end of July. It was also only in July that for the very first time, Canada actually committed to share even a single dose from any of those bilateral contracts. A couple of weeks before that, we'd said we also wouldn't take any more from COVAX. So when we talk about Canada's current pledge to donate 40 million doses to COVAX, again, we have since July had enough for everyone in the country. We didn't actually share any doses. None were delivered until September. September is when the first ones were delivered, and we've delivered about 2.5, little under 3 million. So less than 10% of our pledge. So this takes us to this question of, if we're talking about competing for pieces of the pie, what about making the pie bigger? And that's where we get into talking about things you may have come across, the TRIPS waiver. So the TRIPS waiver is this proposal at the WTO. It was proposed originally by India and South Africa. This would be a temporary waiver. So they wouldn't get rid of the patents, it's just temporarily waiving them, of patents relating not just to COVID-19 vaccines, but also drugs, things like parts of ventilators and so on that are needed to respond to COVID-19. And this is not a complete solution by any means. We could have the waiver today. It wouldn't actually create any new doses tomorrow, right? It's kind of like, this is the recipe. If the world needs this pie, presenting the recipe for the pie is important, but you also need ingredients and chefs and a kitchen and so forth. So all those pieces we need to look at, but you do also need the recipe. So it is one important step there. And as we see here, most of the world supports this idea. Canada's official position has been that we're on the fence. In truth, we have been a bit obstructive, especially initially. We've kind of stepped back ever since the US said that they would support this, at least for vaccines. But this is also something that the way the WTO works, Canada does not have to implement the waiver at home if it doesn't want to. But if Canada or any of these other countries blocks the waiver, it blocks it for everyone. So we're actually currently standing in the way of other countries being able to do this. So, that is certainly a consideration. And other countries have been reversing their position. Australia, for example, very recently, earlier this month, reversed its position to now support the waiver. So where does this take us? Well, there are a couple ways we can look at these conflicts and tying this back to vaccines. During the Cold War and polio in the 1950s and 1960s, the Soviet Union and the NATO powers, particularly the US, put aside their political differences and in fact, conflict to work together to develop polio vaccines and distribute them and move toward the eradication of polio. They recognized that was a bigger issue and that they should put aside their differences. More recently, we've seen the reverse. For example, during the War on Terror, we saw the CIA actually co-opt a vaccine program in Pakistan in the search actually for Osama bin Laden, which, in the short term was serving a goal that they had, but in the long term has actually fueled vaccine hesitancy, especially for polio vaccine campaigns in many parts of the world, but particularly in that region, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Because, what better way to fuel a conspiracy theory than to actually kind of make it true? The CIA actually was involved using a vaccine program for cover. They've since said that they're not going to do that anymore. So, this is just an example of, the short term versus the long term and striking that balance. And, as Canadians, obviously we want everybody to be vaccinated. Here in Canada, want everybody to be safe. But we also need the rest of the world to be safe. We also, need to address issues so that we're not developing new variants in communities that have no protections that will then come to Canada and, keep us on this cycle of endlessly needing new vaccines. because we didn't stop it worldwide, as soon as possible. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Adam, for your presentation. I really learned a lot about and this has been something I've been thinking about as well, because I mean, it really relates to the way we look at the less developed world, and the way the first world is dealing with this situation, which is, not just in vaccine rollout, but the hundreds and hundreds of years of colonialism, which we've come to expect in the way we've treated our neighbors and people in the less developed world, and how we look at them. And so it seems to me we really need a sort of paradigm shift in that sense, instead of looking at ourselves as completely ethnocentrically and as the only players in globalization, to have this kind of rollout, etc., and make sure people are getting the vaccine, as many people are getting vaccinated as possible. So thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. Our last speaker is Jennifer Arp, and Jennifer, I think you're going to be talking about mobilizing at the community level, which is, we've had a lot of theory, a lot of the problems discussed, etc. But now you're actually going to say, how are we going to do this? Hopefully, well, even from the small community approach. And I think that's wonderful that you can join us today. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And in a very short period of time, I will share some tips and ideas for ways that community can mobilize. So I have a background in community organizing, held elected office here in Toronto, where I live, run for city council as well here in Toronto. I was on the school board and vice chair. So I've been involved in a lot of different communities. So my experiences today and some of my thoughts and ideas are coming from that experience of being in Toronto and conducting research in Toronto as well. So this is a map of Toronto. You can see the subway line and the transit line in the yellow U and the green across the bottom of the screen. And this is actually a map of the income and wealth distribution in the city of Toronto. The red being the lowest income, the beige yellow color being what would be considered middle class, and the blue being considered the highest income. And you can see where the wealth in the city is concentrated. And you can also see that almost 50% of people in Toronto live at or below the poverty line. And that really impacts a community's ability to organize and to get the voice of their local representatives and to be able to create some significant systemic change within their communities. What's interesting was that I was able to find a map of neighborhood associations within the city of Toronto. The blue are independent residents associations, community groups. One of them is a union for renters that operate alone without any support from anyone else. The red in the middle is a very highly concentrated group of residents and ratepayers associations that not only operate independently, but collaborate as a group. So they have monthly meetings as a unit and use their wealth concentration, if you will, to pressure local political officials. And even when we talk about things like vaccine rollout and vaccine equity and vaccine distribution within the city of Toronto, and what that looked like at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, the middle of our city and across the bottom of our city had significantly greater access to vaccines than those who lived in the northwest and the northeast corners of our city. And when it was finally raised as a problem, the solution was to open vaccine clinics and force people to wait in line for hours, line up at 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning rather than book an appointment and go. So people were having to book time off work or just not get vaccinated at all. And so what, as community organizers, can we do with this as an issue and with some of the other issues that we've seen today? So communities can bring about change in a variety of different ways. The most important thing is being able to reach residents directly using different forms of communication. Emails or posters are often used, but that's really a means of low-level engagement. Going door to door, connecting with existing community-based infrastructure like school councils or community health agencies can engage communities on local issues more effectively than just hosting monthly meetings and expecting people to show up, or hosting a meeting when there's an issue and then hoping to be able to mobilize quickly. COVID-19 has significantly impacted community ability to mobilize, with lockdowns, people losing jobs, dealing with homeschooling their children, caring for elderly family. It's also shown immense opportunities to mobilize in different ways and using new technology and the things that we weren't using before in order to be able to do that. So I'm a big believer in grassroots participatory organizing, and I've done a number of participatory community-based organizing here in Toronto. When I was a school trustee, I brought together a group of parents and educators in order to co-create some learning opportunities for the schools in the ward that I represented that received government funding, and became a model that was used when the Toronto District School Board was conducting their Enhancing Equity Task Force. So, I believe that shifting towards a participatory approach encourages the ownership over ideas. It breaks down cultural differences and it builds trust. It will also help to rebuild relationships and establish new ones as we start to recover from COVID-19. I also believe that this is a more sustainable model of community engagement and community organizing, because it encourages the entire community to become engaged, rather than just working with one or two community organizers who might move on into different opportunities or move out of a neighborhood altogether. Building collaborative relationships between the community and those within positions of power is also something that's really important through this process. Projects where community members are working directly with politicians, senior bureaucrats, or local agencies can bring voice to the discussion in a way that hasn't been there before, and it also works to help begin trust within neighborhoods. Strong levels of community engagement can mobilize quickly to have their voices heard by those in positions of power. Engagement will increase as people start to see success. So as I said, that big red dot in the middle of the map of community and neighborhood associations, they are able to very quickly mobilize through their email distribution lists and through their phone trees when there's a problem, even with development in their neighborhood or a water main break in their neighborhood, and they're able to get that ear and that voice of their elected representatives very quickly in ways that other neighborhoods in our city don't have the infrastructure and the capacity in place in order to do so. So keeping people engaged may be the hardest part. And I'll give you a recent example. Here in Toronto, one of our very large Toronto community housing communities called Lawrence Heights is undergoing a 30-year revitalization project. And at the start of that project, they actually hired community mobilizers, which were residents within that community, to work with members of the community to not only keep them engaged in the various phases of the revitalization project, but also to solicit their ideas and support for what they wanted their community to look like as it was being rebuilt. And then COVID hit, and those community mobilizers were removed. The removal of the employees has had a domino effect, because the residents in the community now have a lack of engagement, and the trust has been eroded between the community, the City of Toronto, and the Toronto Community Housing Corporation. In a different community, like that red dot, these positions would likely have been restored based on the community's ability to mobilize quickly. So I'm also mindful that there might be some people conducting research on the panel today, or listening to the panel today. And I believe that there is a lot of space and opportunity for researchers to work within the community mobilizing space. So researchers that are engaged in either participatory action research, public health research, or local government, or many other ways, can become allies to local communities by seeking advice on research questions, working to understand communities on a deeper level, rather than current biases or stereotypes. So getting involved and engaged and really getting to that level. Researchers can also be an ally by calling out what is working, not just always trying to solve the problem, and exploring why these initiatives are working, and again, rather than solely focusing on things that need to be fixed. In many ways, those conducting participatory action research can advance the great things that are going on in a community. For example, there's a researcher from the University of Toronto named Christina Guerrera who did her PhD dissertation in improving outcomes for Latinx students. And she realized that one of the things that her students wanted through the participatory process was to have their families involved and engaged within their education. And so she created opportunity and circles and ways for families of the students to participate. And that led to significantly increased educational outcomes for those students. And finally, I believe that globally it's a collective responsibility to amplify the voices of those who continue to be marginalized. As we continue to see increases in inequities, it's a collective responsibility for all of us to amplify those voices. Research is an important tool to bring greater understanding to those in positions of power of the barriers that certain communities face. And researchers can be allies to local communities seeking to improve the quality of life for residents. Ultimately, we have seen through COVID-19 that there are different tools available to connect with each other, moving away from traditional model of engagement towards digital tools such as Zoom, or choosing to engage with communities at different times of the day rather than just the standard evening and weekends, in order to allow people to connect on a lunch break, or those in communities where they don't feel safe going out at night to participate in any discussions. And I would just like to add that while I focus on Toronto, because that is my lived experience, these models and these ideas can be applied to any city globally. We are continuing to see that inequalities and wealth distribution and the ways and who holds power and the ways communities can engage and mobilize are pretty consistent. And so, I hope that I've added something to the discussion today. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, for your presentation. And really, it's always encouraging, especially to us that do work in human security and peace building, to learn about not only how this affects our human security, but how we can actually have sort of positive, peaceful outcomes, because the second part of the human security and peace building is, of course, peace building, and how do you achieve that? And that's so important. And when you're talking about community building, I know this has been something I've been trying to study for years and years, and it's always amazes me how much work is going on at the grassroots, to try and work with this and to try and deal with this. So that was a really enlightening presentation. I really appreciate that. But I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions and answers, Selena.
Wow, I just want to thank all the participants of today's presentation. You panelists have been phenomenal. Your research, your commitment to the work that you're doing is outstanding. As the Alumni Relations Manager here at Railroads, I want to thank you personally for not just what you've shared today, but for taking the power of our place every place. That's truly what it's all about, so thank you. We do have some questions for you, and again, thank you for your time and your presentations. The first question, we'll just kind of go in the order of the presentations just to keep that flow so you know who's next, if we will. We won't throw you off. Rhett, first question for you is, what do you think needs to happen in the case instance of Fairy Creek for a peaceful solution?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think at the very least, it needs to really be led by the First Nations, whose territories the blockades and the protests and the logging's happening on. Like, as I sort of mentioned briefly, there is like some division between members of that nation itself. So, I think once they have the chance to maybe have some more within their community discussions about what they see as best for their collective moving forward, I think those type of discussions should guide what happens next. It really needs to come from, I think, the First Nations whose territories those forests are on.
You talked about trust. You know, we all know that trust isn't something that we hand out. Trust is something that we earn. And given that these parties are so divided, how do we then, you know, lead with trust as the motivator, would you say, with regards to your answer to that first question?
Trust, yeah, I mean, that's difficult when it comes to, you know, economics, profits, you know, resource extraction. It can be tough to trust government or, you know, any sort of, I guess, maybe leadership from the industry side of things. And I mean, just with the issue with the government, sort of they've put out this strategic review. They've said, you know, like this logging needs to be deferred, needs to stop. There's so little left. They've acknowledged it needs to be protected, but it seems to be just like a bit of a front, you know, they just talk about these things and sounds nice and stuff to sort of placate, I think, you know, the people who care about it, and in the background, the logging and the business as usual is continuing. So it's hard to trust the government on those things like that. I guess, yeah, like I said, kind of like referring back to my first answer, I think you just have to place trust in the First Nations that they'll come up with a solution for what's best for them on their territories, and you have to respect the solutions that they come up with as a community.
Something that came to mind was when Jennifer was talking about grassroots organization, right? That so often we're playing the activist role of that, but what can we do to organize trust building exercises within those communities? So just some food for thought there. Kenny was our next presenter. Kenny, this question is for you. Excellent presentation, amazing stats to introduce the topic. You mentioned so many different ways in which environmental racism is manifested internationally. What type of an interdisciplinary solution might be an example of an attempt for justice to actually be achieved?
That is a very good question. And then I think I'm going to answer the question with not another question, but just the way in which I would go about that. Obviously, I don't have those solutions on hand, but to me, I think it's important to acknowledge, all of us to acknowledge the point of departure from an historical perspective. And then I kind of anticipate this sort of question, so I'm just going to share my slide here. This is just an image that I have found on Instagram, on my Instagram feed. It's just the interconnectedness of those different elements that I've discussed and then that the other panels have also discussed. But initially, I think in order to move into an interdisciplinary framework and approach, we need to understand the historical point of departure of all of this, which starts with colonization. And from there on one side, as you can see on the slide, we have supremacy with white supremacy, male supremacy, and human supremacy on the other side, capitalism, and all of the interlinks associated with all of those elements as well. So perhaps I don't have an answer to the question, but hopefully this little diagram can help navigate the listener through a proper understanding of those issues. So yeah.
We're not going to find answers to all these questions. If we did, there would be no problems. But what I like about this discussion is that we're in a position to really take the action as participants of today's session and go and be allies, be support, and look at ways we can eventually find the answers. So thank you for that. Adam, again, compelling stats. And there's two questions here for you. So I'm going to try to have you, they tie together, but we'll tie them together for you. The person asking the question said, I had no idea that Canada had secured the most vaccines of any country in the world. What should Canada do to measure up, to say even be a B for ethical rollout, deliver a solidarity model for vaccine delivery, given that we're currently earning an F?
Okay, do you want me to go there, or do I could hear the whole thing?
Yeah, and then, so that's Canada. And then the other question is, given the disparity you've shared globally, what is your recommendation to support equal access? Should we not consider or evaluate the vaccine companies' ethical support in this situation? You know, we're focusing on country support, but these vaccine companies are making billions of dollars. What's their role in ethical distribution?
Right. No, absolutely. And these things are all tied together. And Canada is in a bit of an interesting place. I mean, one of the reasons, that Canada had such a diverse portfolio is because, of course, not that long ago, we didn't know if any vaccines were going to work, let alone quite a few of them have worked. I mean, around the world, we've got, I believe 18 in use somewhere in the world, although some might be better than others. So, I mean, that's quite remarkable. So, in that sense, it made a lot of sense for Canada to make all these deals. The issue has come kind of after the fact that we've been very slow to share or even to commit to share in Canada. And so, I mean, that in the short term is absolutely something that needs to happen, is that Canada, needs to, at minimum, fulfill its commitment, right? It's at about 6-7% of the 40 million doses that it committed to share out of its, by the time we factor in boosters, it's 700 million dose portfolio. We could be doing a lot more for that. But again, that is just sharing, our larger than necessary piece of the pie. There is also this issue of expanding the pie, so it's big enough for everyone, especially again as we start talking about boosters and those sorts of things, and that is where the pharmaceutical industry comes in. And again, it's been interesting for Canada because, as we've learned, we haven't had any domestic production capacity. We're now working on that. So on the Canadian end, as Canada is funding both publicly funded or both publicly owned manufacturing, which we're building, and we're also giving a lot of money to pharmaceutical companies to also build privately owned facilities. What are we actually tying to this money? Are we tying conditions around access, around affordable access, to these investments? I mean, essentially, and this will come back to the pharmaceutical point as well. If there's public money going in, the public should be getting dividends on that investment. It shouldn't be going purely to private profits. And, the countries that did very heavily invest in the vaccines, I mean, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and they've been a bit better about licensing it, but that was about 97% public funded in terms of the research that went into that. Moderna was very heavily funded by the US. The US does have legal powers to actually step in based on how they funded it and actually make Moderna share technology and so on. They haven't actually taken those steps. They're still working on voluntary access. Same with Germany and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. Again, we've seen a lot of public investment, but governments reluctant to step in when there hasn't been a public return on that investment. So that is something that absolutely needs to happen. Needs to happen in Canada, but needs to happen all over the world. It's a trend we really need to see.
Thank you for that. Athena Madden, professor here at Royal Roads, has also added in some of your work. She's added, here's an article that Adam penned for the Lancet about what Canada might. I'm not wearing my progressives today, ladies and gentlemen, so that's a little small for me, but please look at the chat. Thank you for that, Adam. Jennifer, compelling. As an individual who believes in connection and community, I really can resonate to what it is you shared today, and that it doesn't take, gigantic moves. It's small and simple in order for people to have a voice and to feel like they're connected. And I wrote down, no more being talked at. And I really think that that's a key component in all of these discussions that have been shared today, is how do we create space for that? So your question is, what criteria do you see or look for to become community mobilizers, that we can foster in ourselves?
So the great thing is anyone can be a community mobilizer. So, talking to your neighbors about an issue on your street or something in your neighborhood, you can create and start to mobilize your community based on that. My neighborhood, we've had some problems in the last 2 years with an increase in gun violence. And so, we'd be doing some very grassroots, just having grassroots discussions as a community about what do we want to look like, what are our values, what do we believe in, and then reaching out to our local representatives to gain their support. I, having been involved in Toronto in a couple of different ways, I think my biggest frustration is when a level of government will host some sort of consultation and it's literally being talked at, and we hear over and over and over again that communities are frustrated. They don't want to be consulted with and not see change. And so how do we, as allies, pressure our own elected representatives to make sure that voices are included in discussion that maybe haven't been included before, so that we can start to see change? And, coming out of education and knowing what the educational outcomes are for certain communities within Toronto, the Black community, the LGBTQ community, and, their graduation rates are, 15-20% lower than the rest of the system. And so how do we not only engage with families, but students to make sure that the education system is reflective of what they're looking for so that they can be successful?
I really feel like, none of this is rocket science, but yet it is something that we can all actualize. And you've spoken to a piece of that. I think when we consider the criteria that it takes for each of us to be mobilizers, it really does start with one person at a time, one conversation, as you said, one moment, whether it's in your neighborhood or otherwise. And I hope that today is, go ahead.
I just want to add, given that here in Canada, we've come off a federal election that has the lowest voter turnout in any election in history, what that means for us and and how we as mobilizers can encourage political participation through democracy, through engaged and active citizenship, and all of those pieces to ensure that communities aren't disenfranchised. In the riding that I live in, we had significantly fewer polling stations than we usually have, and people that don't have access to vehicles being forced to go 5-6 kilometers to get to their polling station. And it's just, how do we make sure that things like that don't happen again as community and as those that might have voice in ways that others don't.
Thank you for that. Thank you to all of you. I think when we consider what takes action, it is our voices. And I voting is just one start of that. Voting is just one piece. But if you can organize a community as you've done and you've structured and you've shared, why can we not then call to the attention of our elected individuals what it is we expect of them? What are our expectations? In order for any of these changes to happen, we need to start to stand up and set those standards and make them clear. So thank you for being here. Jennifer, you've taken the Master of Arts in International Cultural Communication. Rhett, the Master of Arts in Environmental Management, and Kenny, Human Security and Peace Building. And Adam is a faculty member. And a thank you to you too, Dr. Ken Christie. I'm getting Kenny and Ken mixed up. And to Dr. Madden for the comments in the chat as well. So I'd just like to turn the time back over to Ken and thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Actually, my best friends call me Kenny too, so that's fine, Megan. I'm happy to get that off of you and Selena and everyone else. But thanks so much for everyone being here today. It's been fantastic. It's been enlightening. We've learned a lot about what's going on, sometimes theoretically, and a lot of the practice is always counting as well. I put up some articles also in the chat box, which I was scrolling through, and I think they might be interested, especially material that comes out of the conversation, these short think pieces. For instance, there's a very good one on environmental racism there, so check that out. But thank you, Jennifer, Rhett, Kenny, and Adam for doing a fantastic job. It's so important to get these different views, to get these perspectives, and to see how these perspectives connect, because that's one of the things we try to do in the Human Security and Peace Building program, to try and make these connections between what seemingly might be disparate or different kinds of ideas or concepts or practices, and try to see how they come together. And what you've shown in your presentations is all these things are interlinked, they're all interconnected, and that we need to work on them. And I really think that point by you, Megan, at the end was really important. It's not just about what we can do as individuals, because we're all committed individuals to changing things, but we have to make the politicians and the people in power, the policymakers, become more accountable. Because it seems that when you're faced with these huge issues of environmental racism, of global warming, of conflict, etc., nobody seems to want to take responsibility. Nobody really seems to want to be held accountable for things like this. They say, oh, it's a problem that's out of our reach. It's a problem that we can't deal with. And there needs to be a lot more accountability. And one of the ways to get that accountability is to put pressure on politicians, on your MPs, on everyone else that is in these positions, to make them see that, you know, that things are possible to change, and that we can achieve peace that way. So just such a great coming together of different diverse groups, and talking about that is a first step, but we really need to take it to another level. I think, as Jennifer said, how to mobilize your community, how to engage is so important. You know, I've got lots of students over the years that come to me and say, well, I don't think I can do anything about this. This problem's too big, it's too great. But I'm prepared to complain about it all the time. You know, I'm complaining every single day, whining about this, what's going on in the world. And I say, you know, the first thing you've got to get out there and do is engage. You know, go out and vote, talk to your local politician, write letters, petition, even take part in protests. You know, you may think that none of this has an effect, but actually it does have an effect, because it brings other people's attention to it, and it makes them realize that they are in some sense accountable. The protests at Fairy Creek, you know, which my daughter was involved in. So, you know, hope she's not arrested, actually. So she's not calling up me to bail her out or something. But, you know, this is important. It's important to have that sense of activism and participation and engagement. And that's the only way we're going to change these things. And hopefully, of course, we can. So I'd like to thank you all for taking part in this. Thank you to Selena. Thank you to Megan. Thank you to Athena for organizing this and all the great work you did. So give yourself a big pat in the back for that. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I don't know if Selena has any last words. I don't mean last words like last words. I mean final words in the webinar.
Just echoing everyone's thanks to all of our panelists, our organizers, and to all of our attendees for joining today. I just popped a note in our chat box that we've been collecting all of the great links that have been being shared, so we'll compile them into a blog post, and that way everyone can have their fingertips on the recording of today's session, as well as the links that have been shared. So a big thank you again to those who joined us live, and to those who are viewing this recording later as well. So that's all from me, Ken. Back to you to send us on our days.
Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe and well. And you know, it's important to take care of each other. That's the most important lesson, I think, in life. So have a great day, and be kind. Is that in the words of Bonnie Henry? I'm not sure anymore. Something like that, but you know what I mean. So take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.